Today's webinar. Gary Kosman, the founder and CEO of America Learns, will be sharing his tips and strategies for how to really make sure that we as nonprofits are finding the best technology options for what our program needs and what makes sense for different programs. Today's conversation is hosted by Mini. We're a national network that convenes organizations across all youth service sectors focused on strengthening outcomes for youth and young adults who are really at that highest risk for victimization and or delinquency. We see our work fitting in 4 different kind of buckets. We see Mini has a role in increasing cross-sector collaboration, so finding those ideas that are really strong and working in one area of youth service and finding ways to break down those silos and share those innovations across youth services. Part of what we do and how we do that is really through unearthing and sharing innovation, looking at what's working, where are there effective practices, and how can we clearly communicate what is working and what's not working with each other. We also do that by cultivating evidence, supporting implementation of evidence-based practices, as well as looking at areas of innovation and helping to develop strong bases of evidence behind them. And the goal for really all of it is to improve outcomes for youth, really looking at how do we achieve real change in the lives of youth and their families today. So that's a little bit about Mini for those of you who may be new to us. I am Katie White. I'm the Director of Research and Innovation here at Mini, and so obviously have a strong passion behind finding out what works and how do we share that, and then how can we find tools and research that help us do our work better. And so we are very glad to have Gary Kosman here today to share some ways that you can start putting the groundwork behind data collection and really strong performance management tracking. Gary is the founder of America Learns. They're a national technology company that helps nonprofits collect and organize and report out on data in ways that are easily accessible and really usable by organizations so that you can take that information and put it into action very quickly. When Gary's not doing America Learns, he also does a lot of really fantastic work serving as the Echoing Green Fellow and was highlighted in their book, Creating Good Works, 25 Years of World-Leading Social Entrepreneurs. He also was highlighted in former President Bill Clinton's book, Giving, How Each of Us Can Change the World. Gary has several different hobbies that also keep him busy. He wanted me to make sure that you knew that in addition to all of these hobbies, which are very exciting, he has also tracked buffalo across Yellowstone National Park. So there is your random Gary fact for the day. And with that, Gary, I will hand it over to you and let you get into the good chunk of our presentation today.
Awesome, Katie. Thank you so much. Is my audio okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Perfect. So before I begin, I just want to thank the team at Mini. I've done a number of webinars over the years, and I've never been hosted and worked with such a team who's so on top of getting these things organized well. So Leah, Kevin, Katie, you guys are awesome, and thank you for your patience as I missed deadline after deadline making this happen. So as Katie shared, and as you guys know, the formal name and title of this presentation is Grill the Tech Vendor, How to Choose the Best Technology Options for Your Nonprofit Program. But this webinar can also have a number of alternative titles. It could be making sure you're not taken advantage of during the sales process, making sure you're leading the sales process and not the salesperson, making sure your people don't revolt when you introduce a new system into your organization, and finally, making sure your people love and benefit from any new system that you help bring into the organization. So if any of these titles feel relevant to you, this time should be meaningful and helpful. So before we get into content, I want to share why I care so much about this topic. When I first started America Learns back in the early 2000s, I thought that we had it all. We had awesome technology, and we would do sales presentations with nonprofit leaders all over the country. I would show them our fancy stuff. They would love it. They would say, Gary, send me a contract. They would send us a check. It was exciting. And then many of our initial clients would never use our system. And we would lose them after a year or two. And that wasn't okay. And at the same time, we were working with a lot of organizations that were continuing to work with us, and we're getting a lot of benefit from the system. And so I started asking myself, since these customers who are paying us and then never using our system clearly want to use it, they're seeing value, otherwise they wouldn't have asked for a contract, they wouldn't have paid us, why aren't some customers using it? And I realized that a lot of the reasons behind the non-use of it is that the sales process wasn't thorough enough. And I became obsessed with kind of creating the model of what I think is a strong sales process to make sure that before a contract is signed, nonprofits do the work that they need to do to make sure that this system that they're looking at is truly going to be used and useful. There are a couple other reasons why I care about this topic. The first is I run into so many nonprofits on a daily basis in my work over here at America Learns who come to us and say, you know, we're using this system, and this system. The salesperson told me that this system is going to take care of all of my problems. It didn't. Technology from our perspective is never the answer. People are the ones who use the technology. We need to focus primarily on the people who are going to be using these systems and then the technology. And then finally, the other reason why I really care about this topic is that we also run into a lot of organizations where there was a phenomenal person who led the process of evaluating different software and technology systems out there. They helped implement it. They helped to implement the system in their organization. They did a great job implementing it, and then they were promoted. They left to a new job. They quit, whatever happened, and then that system was never used effectively ever again. And so we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. So this is why I really care about this stuff. And here we go. So there are 7 steps that I'm going to encourage you to follow during a process of evaluating technology for your organization. And the first step really encourages you to step back and to remember where most salespeople are coming from. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring in our guest speaker, Alec Baldwin. Alec? Oh, he's shy today. Alec? Sorry. All right, he asked me to speak for him. So if any of you have seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, Alec here is a sales manager, and he always is telling his salespeople, ABC, always be closing. And this is what you hear in most sales operations. These salespeople, even with the best of intentions, have quotas every month. They have goals, and they need to sell X number of widgets, X number of licenses to software every month or every quarter. And it's their goal to get as many of these things, as many of these contracts signed as possible. That doesn't make them evil human beings. It just means that their perspective is often very different from yours. And so what that means for you is that you have 3 big responsibilities during the sales process. It's really important that you are totally aware of what you need this technology to do. We're going to talk more about that in step 2. The second thing is that while the salesperson is trying to speed up the sales process, it's your job to slow it down. Let the salesperson worry about their quotas. That's their challenge. That's their problem to deal with. It's your job to make sure that your organization gets the best technology for your program. And then finally, it's really important that we keep the salesperson focused on you and not on a generic prospect. Part of the process of a salesperson trying to meet their quotas often involves trying to put you into a category and saying, oh, you're type X, here's what I'm going to show you. As we're going to learn today, it's actually your job to push back and say, no, here's why we're unique, and here's how I need you to customize your sales process so it's totally relevant to me and so that there won't be any surprises whatsoever once a contract is signed. So that's the outline of what we're going to make sure happens today. So the next step after we remember where most salespeople are coming from is to really just know what you need. This just happened with us this morning where a phenomenal organization contacted us and said, we want a demonstration. And I asked the person who called, hey, tell me exactly what you need. And the person said, well, we really just need a better system. And if you're coming at a sales demonstration with the idea of just saying, hey, we need a better system, I really argue that that is not sufficient, and you're setting yourself up to be taken advantage of by the salesperson. It's really, really important before you participate in any demonstrations whatsoever. I would argue even before you start looking at different websites and different possible solutions out there, that you first take time to really lay out the specific requirements and the specific problems and goals that you want this potential technology to address. Now the reality is that a lot of nonprofits out there don't always have the internal expertise to identify what this technology needs to do. And we believe that if you guys don't have the ability to do that, that's first of all totally okay. Second of all, it's the salesperson's responsibility then to do this with you. So if you feel like you're not able to really put a total complete list of requirements together, do go on to the web and find a couple of vendors, look at the ones that seem most appealing to you, call up the salesperson and say, hey, I'm not totally sure of exactly what I need, help. And that's also going to really tell you, the ones that say, okay, I will help you, will immediately let you know which organizations are truly dedicated to customer success and which ones are really just focused on pushing product. So obviously you're also going to use your requirement stock to shape how you're going to review the services that you check out. This is going to prevent you from putting yourself into a space where you get wooed by pretty technology and great features. So if you're not sure where to begin, here are some questions that I encourage you guys to ask. And many folks have made this PowerPoint deck available to you, so I'm not going to go through all these questions right now because you didn't come here to just have me read a PowerPoint deck to you. And you'll see here that these sample questions were built from the perspective of a mentoring program, but if you run a tutoring program, or swap out mentors with tutors, if you run a other type of volunteer effort, go ahead and swap out mentors with volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. So the big first category of questions are what's the type of information we need to track about the people we are serving and the people who are doing the service. So what information do we need from our prospective mentors or volunteers? What information do we need about our enrolled mentees, et cetera, et cetera. Then I encourage folks to think about operations-focused questions. So what information do we really need to effectively monitor our X's, our mentors, our tutors, our volunteers? What information do we need to constantly strengthen operations outside of supporting our people who are delivering services? And finally, and obviously this is really important, especially with nonprofit data systems, what additional information do we need when it comes to tracking impact? So what info do we need to thoroughly report to existing funders? This next question is huge and it's often missed during the tech planning process, but what information do we need for aspirational funders? So who do you anticipate going to a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? What's going to be important to them? And we can start planning for that data collection process now. Because the last thing you're going to want 5 years from now is to realize whatever technology system you invested in is not going to allow you to meet these guys' needs. And then finally, what additional information do we need to demonstrate impact? Now, one of the documents that the many folks have made available to you in the file download section is the America Learns Long Beach Blast Excellence Inventory. If you guys do run a tutoring or mentoring or volunteer-driven program, I really encourage you guys to download this inventory. If you're not sure where to go in terms of laying out your exact requirements right now, you can fill out this inventory to give you a really good sense of what you might need from a technology perspective right now to help increase the performance of your training, monitoring, support, evaluation, and communications efforts in your program. So download that, And you can actually then even fax, who uses fax machines anymore? Scan an email, the result of this inventory to any salespeople that you work with, and they can see what you're really focused on, and then they can see if they can align their solutions to you. And then the final part of step 2 is to do some thinking about the future. So one of the complaints that we often hear from prospective clients of ours over here is that they implemented some sort of database 3, 4, 5 years ago, and that database no longer meets their needs. And they need to add a bunch of fields, they need to do this or that, and their current vendor is saying, hey, those additional fields are going to cost $10,000. If you want to run new reports, it's going to cost X thousand dollars and take 6 months. It's really important to do some scenario planning and ask yourselves internally, what might our organization look like 10 years from now? What might our organization look like 5 years from now? Do wildest dream scenarios and maybe even some worst case scenarios. And work with your consultant, work with the salespeople and say, hey, here's where we are right now, but here's where we may need to be. During our sales process, I need you to show me, I need you to prove to me that your solution is going to be good for us now and in the future, because I'm looking for a long-term relationship, not just for a 1 or 2 year thing. Really encourage you to do this. Oftentimes we also found that consultants brought in to help organizations determine which technology you should invest in skip out on this process. So if you are in the process of hiring a consultant, please be sure to add to their deliverables some future scenario planning and make sure that they're really thinking about what your organization may look like a decade from now. All right, so that is step 2. Step 3 is a really quick step. As I mentioned earlier, I strongly believe that technology is not always the answer. And so after you develop your list of requirements of what you want, which processes you want to make more efficient in your organization, really encourage you guys to simply ask yourselves, is this truly a problem that technology should solve given the state of our organization or given where we're leading our organization right now? Super simple, but super important to just double check with yourselves on, so you're just not falling into the technology is always the answer trap. Okay. So steps 4, 5, and 6 are the most important parts of this process. So normally when you connect with a software vendor and say, hey, I'm interested in your service, the first thing that salesperson is going to want to do after learning a bit about your organization, they're going to ask about your goals, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully you're going to then present your requirements list to them and say, is your service really aligned with our goals? Is they're going to push you and say, you know what, we need to take an hour, we need to take an hour and a half and really walk through our software with you. I encourage you to push back on that and instead ask a few questions before you start investing time in a demo. So assuming now that you've presented your requirements doc to them, ask the salesperson, hey, how is your service aligned with our goals? And also, what other services should we be looking at? Now this is a crazy question, right? You're asking a salesperson whose job is to push a specific product or service what else you should be looking at. It's really important to me that as your organization looks at potential technology solutions, that you only partner with a company that is truly aware of all the options out there and that is truly dedicated to your success, even if you don't end up being their client. And so this is a great question to figure out other solutions that you might want to look at, A, but this also is a little psychological test on the organization you're talking to, and it helps you determine how committed that potential company is to seeing its customers truly succeed with or without them. And I would argue that you only want to do business with a company that will recommend other potential companies to you to look at. The other benefit is that there's less research for you to do, right? So you're going into this space, you may not be an expert in the field of what this technology does, and you don't know all the options out there. So let's see if we can uncover new options that you should be looking at during this process. The next thing is that if the salesperson passes that test, again, they're going to be saying, hey, let's do an hour-long sales demonstration. Let's do an hour-and-a-half long sales demonstration, whatever it is. I encourage you guys to push back and say, you know what, just give me a high-level overview first. Let's just take 20 minutes. And I just want to see the main ways that your service addresses our needs. And I just want to confirm, Mr. or Mrs. Salesperson, that you really understand what we're looking for. And then, you know what, I promise you, after, I'll then give you my hour and a half, once we can make sure that we are on the same page. This is just something you can do to make sure that you're respecting your time and also respecting the salesperson's time and really making sure that truly everybody's on the same page around what the goals are that you want to accomplish. So you may throw the salesperson off a little bit. You may hear a pause in your conversation once you ask for this, but it's really, really important and just respectful to yourselves. So I encourage you to do that. Now, let's go ahead and assume that you've now created your requirements list. You've shared that with the vendor. They have confirmed that they truly understand your requirements. They have confirmed in this 20-minute quick high-level overview that they likely can do what you need. And they've also passed the psychological test of showing to you and proving to you that they truly are interested in your success. Well, then it's time for the 60 to 90-minute demonstration. And what I'm going to beg of all of you is to ask these folks and say, you know what, I really appreciate the time that you're about to share with us, but I'm not interested in a generic presentation. I've given you our requirements list. You've told me that your system is super flexible, it can be aligned with our needs, that your system is super customizable. Please build a demo site that is aligned with our requirements. I don't want to see a demo site that is not aligned and where you just tell me for an hour that we can customize this and customize that. This is especially for those vendors who are telling you in their marketing materials and their initial conversations with you, oh yeah, our system is super customizable. The reason why this is so important is that so many nonprofits end up working with a technology vendor who say, yeah, our system is totally customizable, and they don't reveal in the sales process that, yeah, the system may cost $2,000 a year, but the customizations, if you want X, Y, and Z drop-down menu or X, Y, and Z report, that's actually going to cost you another $8,000 to $10,000. We see this far too often. And so if someone's telling you that something can be customized, let them customize it during the sales process. And then there are a bunch of questions that I encourage you to ask on top of the questions where they confirm that they can truly meet your requirements. We want to make sure that whoever you're dealing with is a completely honest and candid person. No technology platform out there is perfect. There are some great things and some annoying things about everyone. So go ahead and ask the salesperson what they find annoying about their service, and then also how those issues are being addressed, right? Because there's always going to be some little thing that's likely annoying about everything. And so we want to figure out, okay, cool, so you're totally aware that X, Y, and Z feature is currently a bummer to use. So ask them, all right, where is that in your priority list of addressing that issue right now? Also really encourage you to ask about the age range of people who currently use their service. So just look at internally in your organization the generational span that you guys serve and make sure that they have a broad user base that includes those generations, because obviously people of different generations often have very different comfort levels with technology. We want to make sure that you don't put a bunch of people in their 90s, let's say, who are less comfortable with technology in front of a platform built for teenagers. Another important question that I encourage you to ask the salesperson is, hey, how do you evaluate your impact with organizations like mine? So we're not just interested in whether this company has the right fields and can generate these reports, but how do you know your service is really, truly effective with other clients that you have that are similar to the organization that I'm leading? These next two questions I think are probably the two most important questions during this part of the sales process. The first is, what are the circumstances under which your service succeeds with clients? And then what are the circumstances under which your service fails with clients? The reason why this is so important is that you really want to only work with vendors, in my opinion, who are not just experts on technology, on code and on software, but who are experts in implementing their services within organizations that have structures and cultures similar to yours. We're going to talk more about structure and culture in step 6. But we want to start hearing from them under what conditions, what does my organization need to have in order to truly benefit from your system. And here's what this may look like. So this is something that we share with organizations that are evaluating our service either verbally or through a PowerPoint slide during the sales process. We say, hey, if these things don't happen, you will definitely waste your money with our services. And the salesperson should be completely comfortable with this because ultimately they have no, they don't benefit from you investing in something that, well, hopefully they don't benefit from you investing in something that's not going to eventually work in your organization. A lot of times when people are evaluating our services, they will ask us how many clients we have, and that's definitely a valid question that I encourage folks to ask. But one of the things that we have found is that simply knowing the number of customers that an organization has, a vendor has, does not tell you how successful they are. An organization might be really, really good at getting new clients every year, but really, really lousy at retaining them. And so we need to ask questions to figure out what that retention actually looks like. So instead of, or on top of asking folks how many clients they have, ask them, of your current clients, what percentage are actually using it on a regular basis? Also ask them, because in the nonprofit space, there's so many funders out there now that are requiring the use of certain technologies they say, hey, if we give you money, we want you to use this platform. A lot of data companies and other nonprofit technology companies right now have huge client bases that are made up of organizations that are quote-unquote forced to use their systems. So we want to know which percentage of their client bases choose to work with them as opposed to being mandated to work with them by a funder. And then finally, we want to look at their renewal rates. So how many or what percentage of your mentoring or tutoring or youth development clients renew with you during the second year, the third year? We're looking for their retention so we can figure out if folks who work with them are truly happy over the long term. Oh, and I see that a couple of questions are coming on here. So Doug, just so you know, I'm going to get to your question at the end. And then Monique, there was that acronym on the how to guarantee failure screen called RRL. It's called report. It stands for reporting and reflection log. It's not relevant. It's a part of our system. So thanks for that question. So once you get a sense of their client retention rates, it's also really important to ask folks about their sustainability. So one of the questions that we often get during our sales process is, hey, what happens to our data if we decide to stop working with you? And the answer is, of course, you can export it and get everything that you need in Excel files. But beyond that, we want to make sure that this company is not going to implode while you're working with them. And so if they're a for-profit company, simply ask them, are you profitable? And for how long have you been profitable? And what's keeping you alive right now? Is it revenue? Is it loans? Is it investors? And also ask them, how dependent are you on one type of government-funded client? There are a lot of companies out there, great companies that provide awesome services that have become really dependent on one grant stream from the federal government or state governments. And if that grant stream goes away, they're gone, most likely. And so we want to make sure that hopefully, just you want to be careful. You test your own kind of gut on whether it makes sense to do business with a company that's maybe overly leveraged on one type of client base. If they're a nonprofit vendor, we also need to have sustainability questions to ask them. So is your division that's providing this technology primarily funded by grants or revenue? If they are funded by grants, when's that next grant source going to expire? And if it's going to expire, what happens to the technology that you might be purchasing from them? So that's where these other questions come into play. So if that money is going to just disappear tomorrow, what's going to happen to your service and the customer support that you're providing behind it, and then what's going to happen to my data? Right. Like a few other questions here during this longer demonstration around technical support. So we don't just want to ask the question, when can I call you, when can I email you, right? So they can say, hey, we're open from 8 to 5 Central, and that's when you can call us. That's when you can email us, and we'll respond. We need to go deeper than that. So we want to ask the salesperson, how often would you expect me or my team to ask for support after our first 3 months with you? The reason why we have this after our first 3 months is that there's going to be a learning period. So maybe the salesperson is telling you, hey, this system takes 6 months to implement. Great. So swap out this 3 with 6. So once the system is up and running, how often do you currently hear from clients? Whoops. Are we still there? Okay. I think we're still there. And then also ask the salesperson, why would we be contacting you? So what are the issues, the most common issues that clients currently have with your system? And then I would also ask the follow-up question, what are you going to do to make sure that we don't run into those same issues so that we're not always calling you about that topic? Just so you know, asking about their staff to client ratio may not tell them much. From my perspective, working with a company that actually might have a really high staff to client ratio, meaning they have very few staff members and lots of clients, that may not be a bad thing. It may be that they've actually developed a really easy-to-use service that doesn't require them to have large technical support staffs. So what you may want to do as a test is just call and email their support line a few times during the sales process, and be sure to do so at different times of day and on different days to learn what their wait time looks like at getting somebody to help you out. Right, and then a few other questions during this, again, the 60 to 90 minute walkthrough, and I'm not going to read all these right now, but you also want to ask the salesperson, okay, cool, so, this is great. You've been really holding my hand during the sales process. You've been so attentive. I really appreciate it. One of the challenges in working with technology companies is that oftentimes the sales process is super, super, super hands-on, and then you get passed on to implementation and contract signing, and you rarely hear from people again. So it's really important to ask them questions around what the relationship between you and the vendor is going to look like once that contract is signed. So questions like, hey, how do you currently determine what your next upgrades will be? Do they come from client feedback at all? How do you track and respond to dreams I have about your service? How often do you release new features, et cetera, et cetera? Also, we believe that it's the responsibility of technology vendors working with nonprofits that because most, especially smaller nonprofits, don't always have internal capacity to really evaluate the use of the systems, that it's the vendor's responsibility to provide some sort of evaluation service or framework to help you figure out whether the service is truly meeting your goals. Not everyone shares my perspective, but there it is. So I encourage you to ask them questions. Are you going to interview us to see how things are going? When are those interviews going to happen? Who wrote the interview questions? Are you going to interview our mentors, our tutors, our volunteers, et cetera, et cetera? And then what are you going to do with this information? And as we get towards the end of your longer demonstration, it's really important that you do an institutional memory check to see how this customer, or how this vendor, keeps track of issues or relationships with each of their clients. So you're likely going to be assigned an account executive or a team to support you during the implementation process, and you want to make sure that should that person or should that team dissolve, quit, et cetera, is the next person who's going to be around to support you going to know where you're at, or are you going to have to retrain them about every aspect of your organization? And so I'm just going to take 10 seconds here. Go ahead and read the little Dilbert cartoon. All right, so that's the scenario we want to avoid. So we want to ask them directly, how is this, our main contact's replacement, going to know about us and how we use your service and what our goals are, what our challenges are, should they leave? And finally, last part of this process is just asking the vendor if they have a set process to help you share their service with people internally. So many of the organizations we work with, the person who's leading the technology evaluation process does not have a formal background in evaluating services, such as the ones that we create. And so if that's the case in your organization, ask the experts. Hopefully they have expertise on how to get really clear feedback from your team. All right, so we have just a little over 5 minutes left, and we're going to quickly run through step 6 and step 7, and then we'll take questions. So as I mentioned a couple of times during this presentation so far, from our perspective, technology is never the answer. It might be part of it, but it's never the answer. If we don't pay attention to the culture in which technology is being implemented, that software, that web service is likely going to fail. So what do we do instead? It's really important that we ask the vendor to share the resources that you're going to need to really implement and manage this service well. And so what questions do we need to ask for then? We need to ask for their, from their perspective, what's the specific list of decisions you need to make before signing a contract around how to best implement and manage the service. And then you want to ask them before a contract is signed, before, for a detailed implementation and ongoing management timeline that you can customize. Hopefully what's going to happen is that they're going to provide you the step-by-step timeline. It's likely not going to be perfect, and that's okay. They don't work in your organization. You're going to ask them for that in a PowerPoint file or a Word document, not in a PDF, because you want to be able to edit it. And in that implementation and ongoing management timeline, you're going to want to create another column or whatever format they give you and figure out which staff member is going to be responsible for each piece of the implementation process and in each piece of the ongoing management timeline. And you're also going to ask the salesperson how much time each of these steps tend to take. And when you do your reference check, you're obviously, well, I encourage you to talk to their current clients and do a check with them and to see how much time this stuff actually took them, so you're getting a truly accurate estimate. Here is a really ugly slide. I'm sorry for the formatting snafu here. This is just another piece on culture. I really encourage you again to ask them questions about the culture piece. So if we do implement your software, Mr. and Mrs. Salesperson, what, if anything, is going to need to change about our culture? How are you going to help us make that change? Are you going to give us the resources we need to make that happen? And because of time, we're going to breeze through these. Again, this would just be me reading slides to you. The most important part of this section is this slide right here. And again, you can download the PowerPoint and get this URL. This website will lead you to a recording of part 2 of this of this webinar, which is a 40-minute, really quick overview on how to build big technology systems into the culture of a nonprofit. And so it's probably one of the worst presentation-wise webinars I've ever given. However, the content is really good. So if you can ignore my fast voice, you'll learn a lot from the content. So I really encourage you to check it out. It could really help provide you with a framework on how to build these big systems into culture. And then the last step I'm going to share with you, and this might seem odd coming from a technology company, is I'm going to encourage you guys to negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. So the salesperson is going to present you with a price sheet and say, hey, this is the price of our system. A price sheet is not the same as the actual price. Nearly everything, especially in this space, is negotiable. And so you'll see this little fortune cookie image here that says you have more power than you think. I gotta tell you, one of the best investments I've ever made for myself in leading America Learns, because we have a lot of technology vendors ourselves, was investing in this 2-day negotiation seminar that a company called Keras puts on all around the world. And I gotta tell you, it has saved us thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars as we negotiate things like server space and hosting and other software that we purchase. It'll just give you the skills that you need to make sure that your organization is truly getting the best price out of these guys. Never look at a price sheet and say, oh, that's the price. It almost never, ever is. So that wraps up the main content of our presentation. I know that I have a few questions that are waiting here. And
yes.
Aaliyah or Katie, is it best for me to just run through these, or what's the best process for folks on there?
Gary, we're going to wrap up one more thing and then commit the rest of the time to answering these questions that we've got. So I just want to do a quick mini plug. If you are on the call and are not familiar with Mini or Mini membership, I would encourage you to consider it. We have a lot of discounts and benefits to our members in terms of access to webinars and member-only events, as well as discounted rates on trainings and consultations. And the prices for members and individuals is listed here, and you can download it from the slides. I will tell you that one of the biggest benefits to being a Mini member right now is the opportunity to take part in Connection 2015, which is our big gathering of thought leaders and innovators and people who really want to be doing good work and thinking big ideas in the youth services field. And it is taking place this year in Philadelphia, and registration is up on our website and available. So come and be a part of it, and we are so excited about this and about having folks involved with it. And that, Gary, is all I want to say, other than if you want to talk to Gary and have more questions to follow up either with him or with Mini, here is our contact information. And in a minute, Aaliyah is going to send out a link to our evaluation. So if you just could take a minute and give us a little bit of feedback about how you thought today was and what we can be doing to offer you better or different or more content, we would love to hear from you. And now, Gary, I will give it all back to you and let you take all of the questions that are coming in. And if you want to type in a question over the chat box, you are welcome to do so. If you would rather ask a question over the phone line, just press *6 and that will unmute your line.
Thanks so much, Katie.
You bet.
So Monique here had the question around, do you think that vendors are honest answering these grilling questions? And I would actually agree with Jenny's response to that question, which is that if you do come across as just being really forthright and saying, look, this is information that I need in order to eventually sign a contract with you, if you keep asking these questions, you're going to gain respect, gain a lot of respect for you, and they should be responding to these. And if they're not able to, it's a really great sign that maybe they're not going to be the best partner for you moving forward. if you are looking for a true partner as opposed to just a quote-unquote vendor. Let's see, Dwayne, generally what percentage off is available on average for salespeople that offers that? I really can't say that. Every company is really different. Some companies in this space have a 5 or 6% profit margin. Other companies will have a 30 to 50% profit margin. So it really, really varies by company. Unfortunately, there's not a rule. And I really want to scroll. I'm going to scroll up here and look at a question that Doug Tanner offered earlier, and I just want to read it all. So please give me a sec. The advice about how providers might band together the customizations, implementation functions, and total customization. So Doug, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to be too helpful here. So Doug is asking about, what's the strategy or suggested strategy or advice can I offer around organizations coming together and going to a vendor and saying, look, here are the customizations that we need in your software. Do this for us, or how are you going to do this for us? And this actually leads to probably the biggest piece of information that I left out of the presentation. It's really important to know that when you're going to a web-based service provider these days, you're usually dealing with a company that has one of two business models. One of their business models is going to be, hey, we provide actually one of three business models. Hey, we provide a basic service that costs usually a limited, smaller amount of money a year. And then if you want that customized, we're going to charge you. And oftentimes what it means to have those customizations is that there's like one copy of their software for every client of theirs. So if you guys have a piece of paper right now, imagine just like draw a square and then draw a bunch of circles in that square. Each circle is a different copy of that vendor's computer code. Now, I really encourage you to be cautious about working with companies with this structure because it's really, really hard for them to upgrade their code because, yes, they have a basic platform, but they have so many customizations that it could be a nightmare to really make wholesale improvements in their technology over the years. Another model of a company that provides web-based services these days is that there's a single platform. Draw another square and then draw a big circle on the square. So this is one block of code that can be super customized or not. But either way, it's just one block of code. It makes it so much easier for the vendor to both support and to upgrade that code because there's only one code base to manage. That's my favorite type of vendor to work with in this space because it's so much easier for them to innovate and usually far more cost effective for everybody involved. And then the third type of vendor is just somebody who's going to build a custom application for you guys. And you just got to do a lot of sustainability questions with them during the evaluation process to make sure that they're truly going to be around over the long term. And if they're not going to be, we got to ask for a ton of documentation around why the database they're building for you is structured the way it is. And when I say database, I don't mean the stuff that you interact with on screen, but the back end, all the tables that they're building to organize information. Why did you build this in this way? And what is this, creating a chart that explains the purpose of each file. And that they do something that's called commenting files, where within the actual code, they explain what each line of code is doing. It's a separate conversation. If any of you are working with potential vendors doing a build custom stuff for you, feel free to email me. I can give you separate questions for them. So Doug, now getting to your question, now that that's there. So first of all, before you even band together, you got to ask the vendor which business model they fall under. And you're likely going to have more success with the second and third business models. You're probably going to want to stay away from the first one because the likelihood that they'll be able to support you over the long term in a clean way is very, very small. There's just too many copies of their code for them to manage if they're truly growing their business. And then just ask them if it's possible. If we bring you X amount of business, are you willing to do this? This just happened to us this past Monday. And I said, wow, that's really, really interesting. You might be bringing 130 organizations to us. Let's talk to see what additional, on or off switches we can build into the code to make it useful for your type of organizations. So just ask and see if they're open to it.
And then Gary, I think we had 2 more questions come in from Gary and from Jenny and Monique.
Okay. Cool. I'm just going to work from the bottom. So Monique, do you have an RFI, RFP document that you would use in order to do an initial assessment before deciding which systems to demo? I don't have that, but again, if you list out your specific requirements document that I talked about in step 2, where you break down, here's what we need for, I'm going to talk about youth development stuff, mentoring stuff again. So here's what we need to best, here's the mentor-focused demographic and personal information that we need. Here's the information we need for mentees. Here's the match type of information that we need. Here's the type of functionality we need around making matches within the system. Here's the type of data that we need, the specific data points we need to collect from our mentors. Here's the data we might need to collect over the next 5 years. We're not sure, but we want you to prove that you can do this for us if we go that way. It's really just a matter of going deep into your organization and making sure you have somebody who can facilitate a conversation around current and future needs. Sorry that I don't have a kind of black and white document there. But Monique, if you do go back to step 2, you'll see all the suggested questions that I have there, and that will give you a really good head start on building up this requirements doc. And then Jenny, what suggestions do you have if your program needs to integrate with other databases in order to obtain compatible systems? I would just make sure that once you have found your potentially ideal vendors, to arrange conference calls between them, so between your existing company that does database, between the initial company that you're currently working with and the potential one, and have them talk with each other and have them both create written plans around how they would do the integration and then what the associated costs are, and also ask them what potential surprise additional fees and time might happen as a result of this. And this is something that we actually just did with an organization we serve out in New York. They had 3 other systems. They wanted to do single sign-on with us and their other systems, and we just had a powwow with all the different vendors, and made it happen. Just got to make sure everyone's talking to each other. If you have a vendor that doesn't want to talk to the other vendors, that's another sign that maybe they're not the best partner to work with. We've seen a lot of that as well.
Well, great. We are right on track. If there's anybody that has one last unanswered burning question, we can take time for that. And if not, I'll remind you that you can download both the slides from today's presentation as well as the handout Gary shared right here within the webinar. Right under your participant box is a little box that you can click to download those files. As well as while you're over on that side of your screen, you can click in the chat box and fill out our evaluation survey, and we would appreciate that. And Gary, we are so appreciative of you taking time today to share with us and be really kind of candid and give us the backdoor view of what it looks like from the other side. I think that's really helpful in helping us make better and more informed decisions.
Terrific. And for those of you whose questions we didn't get to, feel free to send me an email or give us a call. I'm happy to chat with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for coming today and for being a part of this presentation, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars, if not at Connection in Philadelphia.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
So Katie, should I stay on? Is Monique still here? Yes, she is. Should I just go ahead and respond to Monique's questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. So in terms of holding vendors accountable, so again, you did so much of this work already in step 2, right, where you said, hey vendor, here are the requirements that I have for the system, and you've already asked them so many questions, even if we go back to step 5, around how are you going to help us evaluate the use of your service. During this time, you're actually creating that evaluation plan, that accountability plan, before a contract is even signed. And so you're really just going to get this stuff in writing from the vendor, and then it's your job to make sure that they follow through if you feel that they're not following through for whatever reason. And then it's important, we actually have a line item in our contracts that reads, before you sign this contract, we strongly encourage you to set up some benchmarks to judge how effective our service is going to be in working together. And we ask folks to share those benchmarks. And so if they do that, then we'll use those during the year, during check-ins that we have to make sure that we are meeting their needs as well. So does that answer your question? They did not meet a benchmark, what would we do? It would have to be in the contract as well. Yeah, I mean, you just got to figure out, you got to figure out why the benchmark wasn't met, Monique. So was the benchmark not met because of something internally in your organization, or was it truly the vendor's actions or lack of actions that led that benchmark to not being met? And if it's the vendor that didn't follow through on something, then it's if you want to have something in the contract that says here's what's going to happen if you don't do something, you can do that. I've actually never seen that before in terms of the types of services we provide, but I imagine you can at least suggest it. Or is this your decision at the end of your contract cycle to not renew? So they're not going to be able to change their operations for you to meet those initial commitments. Alrighty. I see there are still 11 folks on, so if anybody else has other questions, I'm happy to hang out and respond. Okay, we're good. Okay, awesome. All right, Mini team, you guys rock. Thanks again for keeping this so organized, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. See ya.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gary, for giving a great presentation. And we will chat with you more tomorrow.